Heather.
Hello.
Good morning, Donna.
Hi, Terry. I was downstairs getting my lunch ready so I could learn.
Very good. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm actually taking a trip leaving tomorrow to actually go to Dallas to meet in person with people for a change.
Oh,
It's one of our
nice.
first in-person meetings.
All right, very good.
Yeah.
Anna, how are you?
Hi, Terry. Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Been a while.
It has been. We need another project to do together.
Yeah. Add one to the list, huh?
Yeah. Well, we had about 80 people RSVP, so hopefully they're coming. We're about 90% short of that number right now. All right. Well, it is time. And we'll just give them just a second because we're missing both of our presenters at the moment. I know, oh, here comes one. I know the other is wrapping up a demo with a client and will be here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and go through our announcements just to get that out of the way. And I can find the right screen to share. I will do that. Welcome, everybody. Okay, hopefully you are seeing the right screen. So welcome. I'm glad you guys are all here. This is kind of that new style of lunch and learn type user group meeting that we have started back up again this year. And so it's good to have you here. It's also nice to welcome Mike Deerhart, who is going to have an announcement for us as well. So he's going to get the floor here in a little bit, but let me finish through our announcements before I hand it over to you, Mike. Michelle is our guest. Michelle Hansen's our guest speaker for today. Her and I are going to walk through a presentation with you on flow best practices. So there's our quick agenda. We'll wrap up here in an hour from now. Feel free to eat your lunch. If you're a loud eater, go on mute. Otherwise, interact with us as we go along today. That makes it kind of fun and more enjoyable. So some upcoming events are our next user group meeting will be on April 25th, and then the 19th of May and 16th of June. That whole series is on optimizing your org. So we're going to kind of have a intro session on the 25th, and then on the 19th, we'll do a deep dive into the optimizer tool. And then on the 16th, a deep dive into optimizing your Lightning record pages. So that should be fun. If you have not signed up for those, the QR code there, you can take a picture of that QR code. That'll take you to our registration page where you are welcome to RSVP for those events. If Jackie or Joseph are on the call, you can say a quick hello, but they are our nonprofit user group leaders. And then Jerome and Sulab are our developer user group leaders. Some additional Salesforce opportunities. I do recommend taking a look at some of these URLs. There's a lot of good stuff Salesforce puts together for us. So take advantage of those items if you are interested in any of those. And then the community dreaming events are all kind of going on. So I'll be speaking actually at the Texas Dreaming in April 28th. I think it's 28th through the 30th in Austin. But there's all kinds of things happening that exact same time period. So you will have a variety of things to choose during those 3 days. So take a look at your options there and just kind of mark them off on your calendar because you're going to want to be in part of one of the three. So take a look at what's coming on that. MVP office hours, a great solution if you're having trouble with anything Salesforce. Sign on to there and share your issue. They'll do their best to try to help you resolve them. Automation hours is another great webinar type model where they are giving education, a lot of times related to things like flow and all things automation. If you have a specific flow question that you are trying to solve for, very similar to the format of the MVP office hours is the flow office hours. And I am one of the leaders on that group. The QR code there will take you to the registration page for that. I won't hit this one too much because our next speaker is going to talk mostly about this, but QR code will take you to the registration page for Trailhead DX. Take a quick snapshot of that if that's something that you're interested in. And then just a reminder, we do have a testing center again now in the Des Moines area. We lost that years ago, and DMAC and our relationship with them has allowed us to get a testing center stood back up here in our area. So get your certifications. You don't have to go far now. You don't have to do it remote. You can do that all there on campus in Ankeny. And with that, welcome to everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. And I am going to turn this thing over, Mike, to you if you are ready to go. All right, so everybody welcome Mike Gerhardt, Salesforce, admin evangelist. So
see, close enough. Senior Director of Admin Evangelism.
There you go.
I see some friendly faces on a few people I know. Michelle, I'll call you out. It's good to see you're speaking at the next after me. So, and don't worry, Terry, you're going to make the same mistake I'm going to make while presenting. I'm going to call it Trailhead DX, but it's Trailblazer DX.
Trailblazer.
So
there you go.
No, we're focusing on you. So, so I came on. We're kind of doing a little bit of a roadshow just to let the user groups know and let everybody know what we have planned. There's a lot of big announcements coming out, but for everyone that's thinking of attending, it's a short hop to San Francisco. I make it quite often. For those of you probably flying, there's probably a direct flight to Dallas, and Dallas takes you to San Francisco. I choose Dallas because the DFW has Hyatt connected to it for those few times that they have to de-ice a plane at 10 o'clock at night and then cancel your flight. Not that we've all been there. But so quickly, just to run through some of the things at Trailblazer DX, we're taking a different approach to it. So we changed the name and we're modifying the content a little bit to make sure that you have an entire platform experience when you attend. So not only will you get experience on the Salesforce platform in terms of code and low code sessions, but we're also opening it up and inviting all of our Mulesoft, all of our Slack, all of our Tableau, and all of our, I think I hit everybody, Mulesoft, Slack, Tableau, developer friends in as well. And so I've been working since December with the Mulesoft, Slack, and Tableau teams to ensure have developer content for Salesforce developers, and they have admin content for our Salesforce admins. So not only will you learn more about Salesforce, but you can also venture into very immersive Slack experiences and understand what questions you have, get them answered, and kind of bring back some of that information for your executives that they may have. So, so first of all, that's kind of the level set is when you get there, you're going to see all of our platforms as opposed to really just Salesforce. And so this will just kind of hit on it again, but there will be an area if you just want to learn totally about Mulesoft. We have an entire track. We have a theater dedicated to them. Same with Tableau, same with Mulesoft, or same with Slack. I think Slack's probably the newest addition that a lot of people are looking to understand and get more of a grasp around. There are what we're calling code and low code sessions for anybody that wants to join. And it's a little bit of a mix. Some of them we actually kind of struggled with, is it code or a low code session? Because we're showing so much of the platform in a different way that's actually reflective of how people use Salesforce, as opposed to what I would call these really great use cases that magically Flow Builder can just come in and solve for you. Or look, a simple permission set. Like, I've been an admin, it doesn't work that way all the time. So the other thing that you can do, we have on-site workshops. There will be demos that you can get immersed into. We're really back to, I would say, an in-person event where we're pivoting off of that first. So everything will be around a keynote, around a demo station. We're doing something new called a campfire, where you can actually sit around with product experts for, it's just a wide open kind of discussion. They will come with some key bullet points of kind of topics to guide, but it's your chance to sit down, have a guided Q&A with some of our product managers on, you know, roadmaps, where things are going, or what you would like to see, and kind of feedback into various products. So we've got all that, and we do have a musical guest coming. You can ask me who it is, and I can't tell you because I honestly, hand to God, have no idea who it is. But if I did, I'd tell you. We will have a campground. So I've seen versions of what this campground is going to look like, and I think it's going to be one of our neater campgrounds. So we're thinking a little bit more of, as you wander through, how can you kind of have time to pause, maybe sit, have discussions, hang out in an area, and really not constantly bombarded with things. Like I was looking at it, and I'm really excited for how everything lays out. It gives you a chance to kind of wander around, be in areas that are immersive. So if you really just want to stay into a Slack area, or if you really want to dive into Tableau, you can do that. And then the way that we have our attendee limit set up is it's going to allow you to kind of not feel rushed, not feel packed in, but have a nice, you know, wide open space that you can walk around and not feel kind of claustrophobic, because I definitely do sometimes. And then the big announcement, I don't think this is on our website yet. We're putting this just in this deck. I could be wrong, because, you know, we have website meetings daily, but the main show keynote, and there's only one keynote at Trailblazer DX, will feature Parker Harris. So for those of you at the Des Moines user group that are admins, you know, he's been featured in our keynotes quite a bit. He's a really awesome speaker. He's co-founder of Salesforce. There will be other super sessions, which is basically what we're naming, kind of smaller but bigger sessions that aren't quite keynotes. So we'll have various super sessions on code, low code, and then a few of the product platforms also have super sessions as well. So this is, I hinted to this as I was talking through everything, but this is kind of way we're breaking down key sessions for everybody at Trailblazer DX. So Slack, Tableau, we'll have a huge marketing and commerce area. I would be curious if anybody's going from the Des Moines area and is interested in marketing commerce. I'd love to talk to you, because I'd love to know more about how our admin community is working and what we're doing in the marketing and commerce area. Mulesoft is always really big. Mulesoft has a lot of really cool stuff that they're going to show. And then on top of that, I've been working with my counterpart on the developer side to build the code and low code sessions and theater sessions, which feature low code wise heavily in automation, integration, and some of the other stuff like migrating workflows to flows, because I'm sure that's a little top of mind for everybody. And then finally, so this is an in-person event. There will be some limited broadcast available sessions, but we're pivoting more towards the experience that we can create on site. And that's, you know, getting your fingers on a keyboard, talking with a product manager, quote, touching the product, right? Like interacting with it, where you're not stuck behind a computer, because I'm feeling a little cabin fever at this point. So registration is open. Hotel rooms are not booked full for those people that have gone to Dreamforce and had to feel like they had to rush. So there's tons of good hotel rooms. I have been to San Francisco twice, and I can tell you it's a lovely little trip, and there's still all of the lovely little food stores open, at least the one that I like to frequent. So it's worth the trip to get some of that good food. But if I have time, I don't know how much Terry allotted me. I'm happy to answer whatever questions I can.
And feel free to throw those in the chat as well.
Oh yeah, I can look in the chat too.
That'll work.
I think I might have seen on Twitter last night about Parker.
Yeah, well, that happens.
It does, doesn't it?
We got this deck on Monday and we were told it was exclusive. And then I figured it would change because
So I think the real question is he going to be dressed in costume?
probably not.
I talked to him at Dreamforce last year, and he said no more costumes. His kids
Yeah.
didn't like it or something like that. I think is what he was saying.
Yeah, I think he's using his kids as an excuse. I'm not
That
sure
could
he
be.
liked it. We did at one of the offices that I used to be based out of, we did have both of his lightning suits put
Oh,
on
cool.
mannequins, and that was kind of a little Instagram area.
Very fun. All right. Well, feel free to ask any questions in the chat if you anybody planning on going. You've already registered or you're going to register. I was a little bit bummed when I realized that it was at the same time as Texas Dreaming, and I was already pre-booked. But
Yeah, there's I saw you put up the Midwest Dreaming. I think so. Jillian on my team is scheduled to keynote there, and
nice.
I'll MC that. So I've got a trip to Minneapolis in July in my future for sure.
Yeah,
But
I will be there along with you.
Cool.
That'll be good. Michelle, I'm assuming you'll be there as well.
Yes. So right after that is also Witness Success, which is a women in tech conference, but all allies are also welcome. So I'm on the planning committees for both of those conferences. So I will be in Minneapolis for sure.
Yes, very good.
Yeah, and it's a nice short little drive. Not bad. San Francisco is a short little flight, in case anybody's wondering.
All right. Well, very good. Mike, thanks for coming in. You're
you
welcome
bet.
anytime. We're always we'll make space for you anytime you've got something you'd like to share. And just let me know, reach out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for letting me pop in and crash your party for a little bit.
No worries. So for our next piece of our presentation today, we've got Michelle Hansen, who you have just heard talking. Those of you who don't know Michelle is an MVP and leader of the Cedar Rapids user group. All around amazing person. She's got more Salesforce stickers than I've ever seen. She does have a problem and needs a 12-step program for that, but I'll talk to her later about that. She probably already knows and maybe is involved in one. I'm not sure, but she literally has notebooks and notebooks of them, and she loves cats, and they'll probably be walking around her computer as she speaks today. So Michelle, probably an introduction you've never had before, but go ahead and take control.
Terry, I have no idea why you think I have a problem with stickers after you've seen them all behind me, and this is but a tiny little bit of my newest ones.
Yeah. She literally has notebooks and notebooks full of stickers, every Salesforce sticker you could imagine.
So I will actually make an offer that I make to several user groups I present at. If you send me a snail mail address, you will receive stickers. By the time I get around to sending them, it will be late enough that you have forgotten that you gave me your address, and it will be an awesome surprise when they finally make it. So let's just be honest, that part of my time management still needs some work. So, all right, are we ready to kick this off, Terry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Well, let's see if I can share the right screen. All right, so today we are going to talk about flow best practices. So as we all know, practice makes perfect. So we are going to teach you all about how to make sure that your flows run as smoothly as possible now that everybody's getting started building them. So Terry is going to tag team this presentation with me. So in case you're not aware, Terry is newly named to the 2022 class of MVPs, and I am so thrilled to see that. So congratulations again, Terry.
Thank you.
Get tired of that congratulations, but it never stops coming. So just deal with it. But yes, he's phenomenal. I was so glad he invited me here. So yes, a little bit about me. I work for IBM now. 7 Summits is a consulting company that got bought by IBM last year. So technically I work for Big Blue now. But yeah, so if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm definitely more active on Twitter. I still have an email address. So questions, comments, you want to argue with me about something, I'm all up for debate and, learning more from the community because I am by no means the expert. So yeah, there's that. Oh, another fun fact, as of yesterday, I got invited to a new Salesforce program called the Automation Council. So I think there's about 15 people that they have tapped throughout the ecosystem to serve on the initial inaugural year term, to kind of meet with product managers, help evangelize more things around flow as that's becoming the main automation piece. And they have hinted that if we have opinions, they would like us to share them. So I would be happy to funnel any of your opinions that need sharing with the product team. So, okay, we got a lot of ground to cover and not a ton of time. So I'm going to jump right in. First best practice. Well, you started it. So how do we know what automation type triggering context to actually use for your automations? It was pretty easy with workflows and process builders. You said, just make them run. And Salesforce said, don't worry, I got this. So with Flow, we up the game and they go, all right, so you're a big boy now or a big girl now or a big whatever pronoun you would like to use. So when do you want this to happen? And now you have to start taking those into consideration and asking those questions. So we can do things like when a record first gets created or when it's updated or both, or only when certain fields get changed. Or I can say it's not really about the data, it's more about time. So I need this to happen on a specific basis. As well as I need something else to kick it off. So I really just need to wait here for somebody else to tell me what to do. And then, like most teenagers, if you nag me enough, I will finally go clean my room. So then the next thing to consider is what else involved? Is it just that record that someone saved? Are there other records? Are there actions that you need to take? Are there other systems involved that you need to send information to or get information back from? How fast does this need to happen? Is this something where if I'm sending information out to a separate system for invoicing, do I need to get information back from them before I do something else? Or is this just, I'm telling you, you've got it, I don't care anymore, go do what you're supposed to with it, leave me alone? And then the other question is, who's actually going to be interacting with this flow or kicking it off? So who will trigger that? And it's important to know what kind of access they have on their profile or what sharing settings are going to govern their record access. It's wonderful and great and awesome that we're all sysadmins and we have the permissions to build this, but boy, let me tell you, it's bitten my butt more times than I can count. It works great for me as an admin. My users don't have the same access, and as soon as they hit that button, whole things blow up. So I wanted to jump in to do just a quick demo. And so I'm going to pull up a hands-on org here and we're going to jump into Flow, maybe, assuming I can figure out where I'm at. So we can sort of look at all of the different options that we have for creating new flows. So Terry, quick question for you. And actually I'm going to add anybody on the call. Has anyone here used in a platform event-driven flow?
I have not yet.
Has anybody done that?
Is that shameful?
Not yet.
Okay.
Platform events are still pretty new for the admin group. So it's something that the more I learn about them, the more I really, really like them and want to learn more about how to use them. And there's some ideas to get them a little bit more robust and friendly for admins. So, but when we first go into a flow here, you can see we have all of these different options. So it used to be that we had a screen flow and we had an auto launched flow, and that was pretty much the sum total of it. And so for a screen flow, this is anytime it's not triggered automatically. You actually need the user to click a button or access a page or do something. And the important part of this one is that the users are going to interact with it. There's going to be screens that display data to them, that give them fields to enter data, potentially, all of that. Schedule triggered, you can set this on a frequency. So if I want to run this every day or every week, I think there's some unofficial to also go in and do this on a monthly basis, for example. Auto launch is the old school. You couldn't just run a flow from a record trigger before. You had to actually process builder trigger it. So the record saves, process builder runs, process builder calls the flow does its thing. That's the teenager that only cleans your room after you nag it. So record triggered flow now is basically replacing your workflow rules and your processes, because you can come in here, and this is the one I want to really talk about. because this is where we can specify, just like we did in Process Builder, what object is this going to be on? So I can say it's on account. When do I want to trigger this? Created, updated, both. And now we also have this really nifty one on record delete. So you have users that are deleting records. Maybe they shouldn't. Do you want to warn somebody before that happens? Do you want to check something and maybe create a case or something that says, hey, so-and-so just deleted this record. Maybe you should go check the recycle bin. Then we can also set all of our different entry criteria. So anything that's within this record, you can actually use to trigger it. So things like on the account number, address fields, everything that's within this specific record can be used, including record type ID. And the reason I pull out record type ID specifically is a lot of times people like to use that. This is one of those really rough places where you don't have a lot of good options to get around hard coding IDs. So you need to take that into consideration. Are you going to basically flaunt best practice and use a record type ID, or are you going to change the way your flow runs and works to be able to use those best practices? So always up to you. Just want to make sure that that's aware. Then Salesforce has this crazy order of execution. Like the minute you hit save, tons of things happen. So from that, you can decide if you want it to happen before the record actually hits the database and update things on that, or you can make it fire like Process Builder did after the record gets saved to the database for other things to go happen. So lots of different things to think about. You need to figure out what other automations you have running, what users are going to be doing or other systems are in play to really figure out what the best way to trigger that flow is going to be. So with that, I am now going to pass it over to Terry for a little Britney Spears rendition.
Britney Spears, oops, I did it again. Fault handling and error handling. How do you handle those to give your users a better experience? So this was one that I had shared with, I think I shared this with the group once before, but it's been a long time ago. And when I mentioned it to Michelle, she said, I got to see that. I'm really curious what that looks like. So this is an error handler specifically designed for flow. So if you don't like to create a way of handling errors in your flow every single time, you can create what in developers' language we'd call a framework. And why would you want to do that? Well, it improves consistency. It allows you to have common messaging for your users, because every time you have a fault in your flow, it's going to go down the same path, actually a subflow that handles them identically. It's going to improve your admin experience because you only have to write your error handling process once and then just reuse it. By the way, there is a QR code here that will take you to screenshots of what I'm going to demo for you in just a moment. It is not fancy. It literally is just screenshots. So take it for what it's worth. Improve tracking, because what we're going to do in that framework is we're going to create a record in Salesforce and a custom object that records what the error actually was. So that gives us improved visibility. It allows us to run reports and do all kinds of analytics on what we're seeing happening with our faults, as opposed to just getting an email that you end up having to collect a bunch of and decide when do you want to do something about them. It also can improve your processes. So maybe you're seeing a bunch of errors come in. You can put automation on that to create a case or do whatever it is you want to do with it. So let's take a very quick run through of failing with style. So our first step, if you're going to do something like this, is you need to have a place to store your errors. And so in Object Manager, I simply have a object called flow fault errors. And it just has a handful of fields in there. Things like when did the error occur? What was the error message? What element was it within the flow? What flow did it occur in? The time that the flow started, and who was our user, are all nice things to record. So we're going to start with that, getting that object created, and then we'll go over to flow. And inside of flow, it helps if I'm in the right org. So let's go to flow and take a look at the fault handler. Right here is our flow. You'll notice that this is a screen flow. So this is designed only to work if you have a screen flow that's calling it. So keep that in mind. That's the way this one is laid out. You could do it without a screen, but then there's nothing to show the user. So you would still have to handle what are you going to do with that information. So the first thing is here, I've got a send email action. This piece honestly probably could go away, but it's simply a way of emailing a selected group of people. We have the ability to manage that in Salesforce now, where the email doesn't just have to go to the person who wrote the flow. You can send it to a variety of different users. Arguably, that could be removed from our flow now. But the create record element simply is going to take the information that we're passing in, and it's going to create that fault record for us. You'll notice I've got variables set up to capture all of that information. And this is where we get the nice consistency. So we have a single screen with a specific error on it, error message. And then we've got a variable text email body. That's basically, it's the technical piece of information that you might want to know of what occurred within the flow. So gives you a nice way of having consistent messaging. And that's really the simplicity of that framework. Now let's take a look at what does it look like if I were to call that what's it look like in a flow. And so I created a create case flow just to give you an idea of what it might look like. So in this flow, we've got simple screens there that get created. And then we have a pink element. And anytime you're doing a pink element, you need to take advantage of the fault. So what happens if that pink element fails? It's going to come over here and it's going to run that subflow, which is our error handler framework. Take a quick look at that. It passes in the current date. These were the variables that we were seeing over in the handler. You've got a fault message, a lookup element. Now this piece is just indicating the name of the element that failed. We've got a constant that indicates what our flow name is. So that's the create a case name. And then the interview, when did this flow begin? And it really is about that simple. Anytime you've got pink, runs through the exact same thing. And that prevents me from having to create, in this particular one where I've got 4 pink elements, it prevents me from having to create a unique screen for everything. Just a simple call to that handler and it takes care of it all for me. Michelle, I'm throwing it back to you.
I lost the mute button and then I lost the share button at the same time. Hopping between platforms is apparently harder than I thought. Okay, so number 3, it's keep your hands off my pie. So we want to talk about best practices to avoid hitting limits. So when we talk about limits, what do we mean? Do we have any people who are fond of cars on the call?
Fond of what?
Cars.
Cars.
Yes. Anybody a racer or just into, building cars, all that kind of fun stuff? Any speed junkies? If you are, you're probably familiar with a governor that goes on an engine. And basically, this is the thing that says you can't go faster than this speed. Well, I'm not a racer. I don't really like cars other than like to drive my car and speed a lot because I'm always late. So for me, instead of talking about governor limits in terms of that, I always talk about it in terms of pie, because let's face it, who doesn't like pie? So essentially what we have going on here is Salesforce is a multi-tenant platform, which means all of us have orgs. They all live on the same platform, which means we all share one pie. I have a slice, Terry has a slice, Maggie has a slice, Brandon has a slice. And here's the thing. Maggie, I love you, girl, but you try and eat my pie, I will stab you with a fork. That's just how this works. And it's the same thing with the Salesforce platform. Salesforce does not like people stabbing other people with forks. And so they basically say, once you're done eating your piece of pie, you're done. no more for you. So basically every transaction, every time you hit save, every time you run a process, every time your Apex code runs, that transaction is a pie. And so you have your one piece of it, and that's all you got to eat. So much like your parents told you to take smaller bites and eat slower so that your treats would last, we want to do the same thing when it comes to Salesforce. So some of the limits we worry about are DML limits, and that's data manipulation language. That is the pink stuff, your creates, your updates, your deletes, undeleting, merging records, even basically anything that makes a change to the data in your database. So your piece of pie for this is 150 DML statements that work on up to 10,000 records. So if I need to update 10,000 contacts, I can do that in a single transaction. But what I want to make sure is that I do those 10,000 records in such a way that it's only in 150 chunks. So SQL limits, this is Salesforce Object Query Language. This is something that is great for admins. If you're not familiar, I recommend you look into it. But basically when you do gets, so we're not touching and manipulating stuff in the database, but we need to work with it. We need to see it. So to pull stuff out of your database, your pie is only 1,000 SQL queries. So I can only ask 1,000 questions or 100 questions in my flow. And I can only bring back a total of 50,000 records from those 100 questions. So if I ask you to give me every single contact whose name is Smith, and I work for, let's say, Hulu, that might be a problem. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about with that. So then flow has its own set of limits. And so as you get into building big, complicated flows, I think I've only done this once, but if you have to loop through a lot of records, you're looking for something specific, you can only touch 2,000 elements. So when it runs, every line connects to a box. You can only touch 2,000 boxes. And that even means touching the same box multiple times. Each counts for one until you get to 2,000. So there are definitely some things there that we need to think about, because these are some of those unrecoverable errors. Like this will just cause that nasty unhandled fault exception that your users don't like, which is when we go back to Terry's best practice to handle those faults a little bit more gracefully. But if we can avoid that happening at all, that's great. So there's a concept in code that also works with flow called bulkifying. And so this is where you can take fewer bytes so you don't run out of pie as fast or don't run out of pie at all. And so the scenario I'll actually use is if you had a stack of files on your desk and you are 30 feet away from the filing cabinet, would you pick up one file at a time and walk it back to the filing cabinet and put it away? Or would you grab the stack of 30, take them over to the filing cabinet and put all of them away at the same time? Just makes sense to do it in one batch. You forgot your Fitbit, you're not getting credit for the steps. Don't try and give me that excuse, it doesn't work. The other thing is if you're using a scheduled flow can actually change the way your flow engine runs. So normally, if you're going to do something, you say, go get me records. And you say, go get me all these records. And maybe it's one record, and maybe it's 50 records, and maybe it's 5,000 records. But on a scheduled flow, if you put criteria in that start element, so like where we could say, started on create, and then if we wanted to put in a field like the account name equals Acme, if you do that, flow actually says, okay, I'm going to handle these one at a time. So only for scheduled flows where there is a criterion in the start element, you're guaranteed that it's only working on one record at a time, and it handles the bulkification outside of flow in the back end. It's the cool magic of Salesforce that I don't totally get yet. But if you don't do that, if you say, I just want to run a flow every Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you don't tell it what records to run on, it's just going to run. And then it's up to you to go and get the records that you want with a get. And then we have to worry about all those other limits and work with them in bulk. So to quickly explain this out, I've got a couple of flows we're going to look at here. So I'm actually going to finish building this flow where we update a contact's email address. So I'm going to update the billing street. No, I'm not. Hang on. Yep, we're going to do an assignment here. I grabbed the wrong element. So I'm going to update the billing street. My theory here is that we have an account with multiple contacts, and the address on the account changes. So we want all the contacts to update as well. So we're going to do that automatically, but we want to make sure that we're doing this in the right way. So on my contact, I am going to grab the loop. I'm going to find the street. And I'm going to set it equal to the account records billing street. So now that I have updated this, I need to put it back in the database, right? So everybody would think that what we would do is we would come in here and we would do an update records. And so we are just going to pick the right one here. And so it's the record in my loop. We're going to update. Okay, so if we go through this, we start the flow when the account runs. We get all of the contacts, and because there's a pile, we don't have the ability with a magic pen to just say, if my 30 contacts here, I'm going to write on the top one and it's going to magically bleed through. So I actually have to go through all of these. So if we're talking paper, take the first one off the stack, put it in front of you on the desk, flip it open, find the address, update it. Now we're going to get back up and we're going to put this in the database. So this is taking that one file and walking it back to the database. And so you can see in a loop, I've got pink. So if I do this with, I don't know, 500 contacts, we're going to run into limits because we have those DMLs to worry about, or we have those SOCL limits to worry about. So instead, what we do is we bulkify. And so what we did is the same thing. I still go get my contacts, and best practice, we make sure we found contacts. And so then we're going to loop through them. And what we're going to do is we use that assignment to update them. But then instead of getting up and walking back to the filing cabinet, we create a new collection variable that's like a new pile on your desk. So if you're grabbing from a pile on your left, putting it in front of you, when you're done with it, you pick it up and you put it on a pile to your right. And so we go through this as many times as we need, as long as we don't run into our 2000 flow element limit. So if we're going to do this on, 2000 contacts, we'll have some problems, but 100 contacts, we're fine. Then when we're done, instead of putting that pink in a loop that we have over here, our pink is down here after the loop. So we go around and around and around until we're dizzy. And then when we're so dizzy, we almost fall down. We come down here, pick up that full stack and take it back with one DML statement. So this is one byte of the pie as opposed to 30, 40, 50, 100 bytes of that pie. So that is what we talk about bulkifying and making sure that we are behaving when it comes to governor limits. And Maggie appreciates not getting stabbed with a fork. So with that, Terry, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Very good. Everything is awesome when you stay dry. The Lego philosophy for subflows, so you don't repeat yourself. So let's take a look at what does that all mean. So have you ever seen a flow or ever built a flow that looks something like this? I have had to participate in a flow that looks something like this. And it's a nightmare, guys. Hopefully, if you are building something like that, maybe this particular best practice will be of value to you. So that's a lot of stuff going on. It'll be hard to find what you're using. So stay dry, meaning don't repeat yourself. It's all about reusability, kind of, sort of, mostly. So why do we use subflows? Usability, it's reusability. We want to be able to take information and reuse it whenever we have the need to do so. That fault handler is an example of reusing code. We use a subflow to send things off and let it do its own little magic in its black box, and we don't have to worry about it. Another example of a subflow that fits this model is how many times do you have to go get record types, for example, inside of a flow. I create a flow, specifically a subflow, that goes out and gets record types for me. So I don't have to stop and think, okay, is that the S object type that I need and the developer name and what are those things? I can just simply pass information over to a record trigger subflow, let it grab the information and bring back IDs for me. So that makes things a lot easier, but the most of the time it's not things like that we're doing. Those are kind of like little utility type subflows that are just nice to have around. Most of the time it's some kind of a larger process that we want to be able to push off into its own little set of code because it keeps our main flow nice and clean. It keeps our canvas easier to follow, easier to understand. So when do you use a subflow? I always recommend you plan it ahead of time, because when you're thinking about these larger, more complex flows, you want to think what are those specific elements that I may need to reuse, or that are complex enough that it would just make sense to throw it off to another flow. Just for ease of readability sometimes is a good reason to do it. One thing to think about is the idea of subflow versus invocable flows. If you're not familiar with invocable flows, that just simply means I'm going to send this off to an Apex class. I'm going to get my developer involved and let him do some of that complex processing for me. That's an example of, it's not technically called a subflow, but it's the same concept where I'm just passing off processing to another whatever, whether that's a subflow or an invocable action. It's important to understand the input and output checkboxes when you're creating a variable. We'll show you that in just a second. And then we'll walk through actually the flow elements. So let's take a quick look at what one of these might look like. This is a simple flow that has subflows right there in the center of your screen. We could take and put all of that logic inside this branch if we wanted to, but it does make this more messy. It starts to become a flow that looks like that one that we started off with. But instead, what we are doing is we're simply taking information from this flow. In this case, it's the SO member and the registration original member. And we're going to send that piece of information over to another flow so it can process things for us. I don't have to worry about what's going on over there. I just know that it's doing its thing. It's kind of like a little black box. It does what it's supposed to do. And then it's going to return information back to me. And I got an error on this one, but it's going to return, in this case, that member record or that member variable back to me, along with a product transfer. So this has been a kind of a work in process. It's got a little bit of an error there, but let me show you what that looks like on our record variable. So a lot of times I will meet with folks and they'll say, how do I know when to use an input and an output checkbox? So I just check them all the time. I've seen people do that. They just check it because they don't know any better. And it is intended to allow you to transfer this variable into another flow, or to receive this information back from another flow. So if I want to be able to push this to a another flow, I'm going to set that to output. I'm sending it out of my flow. If I want to be able to receive it, I'm going to have it set as an input. I'm receiving the information from another flow. So on my subflow, what that's going to then look like, it's going to be just the opposite kind of model there. So this will be my subflow, and I'm going to have a variable where it's going to receive that information. So here, this is the other flow that's happening, and I can receive that same variable over in my subflow. So it simplifies your flows, makes them a lot more readable, and something that I think you will want to stay dry and use more, use frequently. Michelle, back to you, my friend.
I'm getting better at this. Okay, so this is actually one of my favorite blog posts that Jen Lee ever wrote. It's called, "Did I just see you hard code an ID?" Oh, hell no. So this goes beyond hard coding IDs, but we're going to focus on that just as time permits today. So one of the ways to avoid hard coding your information into a flow is to use something else, custom. And it's about flexibility being key. So if you move things between orgs, there's not a guarantee that your IDs are going to be the same. Prod to full sandbox, yeah, probably. It's supposed to be the same ID.
Hey, Michelle,
Now,
you're sharing your desktop, by the way.
oh, shoot, hang on.
Those are the slides.
How about now?
Beautiful.
Woohoo. Okay. So if you create a record in Sandbox, it doesn't exist in production. So how can you guarantee that it's got to have the same ID when you move it? Answer is you can't. So if you're trying to put in links to records and you have my domain turned on, your my domain is different for prod than it is for any of your sandboxes. Are you sending something to a specific user? So every time a case gets created of a certain type, you need to notify someone. Well, sure, nobody ever leaves the company or changes their job to a different department. So it's really about keeping it flexible. One of the limits I didn't mention is that flows can only have 50 versions total, meaning if you've made 50 changes to that, all of a sudden you got to go back and start deleting your old ones individually by hand, unless you know how to use something cool to do it faster. But you don't want to have to keep going in there and messing with that because it's way harder. It takes so much time. If you've got development rules that you have to follow, you've got to do it in Sandbox. It's got to go through code review, all this stuff that we don't like. Instead, if you can set it up in something that's the equivalent of a record, nobody cares if you go and you update the field on a record, right? So we're going to do that same thing to be able to keep your flows flexible and your flows needing less maintenance, and you can maintain things elsewhere. So specific values, specific users, and specific values, I'll caveat with not pick lists. Pick lists is pretty easy to deal with in terms of changing those. So, but anyway, the ways we can do this are custom settings, custom labels, or custom metadata. And I will be honest, I joined this party late enough that I never actually learned about custom settings and custom labels. So custom metadata is my jam. That's where it's at for me. So I'm actually going to show you a little bit about this and how we can leverage this even outside of Flow. So I certainly use this in Flow, but I also do this for other things like validation rules. So the first thing I did is I went in and created a custom metadata type. So if you go into setup, instead of going to object manager to create a custom object, we're going to go create a custom metadata type, which is literally just creating a custom object that's not actually a custom object. So instead of an __C, it gets an __ MDT. So I created this custom metadata type called ID mapping. I came in and I just built a couple of custom fields on it, one for the 15-digit and the 18-digit IDs. So again, just like creating custom object fields. Then I started creating records, and it's a pretty super simple record. If I come in here, my account's business record type, that's the name of what it is. And I have the 18-digit and 15-digit ID versions in here. So whichever one I need, I can get to. So now let's say I have accounts, and what I really want is I want to require that there is a website for my accounts, as long as they're businesses. If it's an individual, I don't expect an individual to have a website. There would be no point, right? So to do this, I would build a validation rule. So if we hop in here, we would basically go, just going to throw some stuff in here. So I'm going to go find that website field. So is changed, or is blank, sorry. So I want this to fire, right? And this is going to fire every time. So now I need to narrow it down so that we only get it to fire if it's a specific record ID. Well, the thing I don't want to do is have to hard code that record ID by coming in here to my field and going for my record type ID and finding that and putting it in and having to hard code. So we don't like that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I am actually going to go and insert a different field by looking through my custom metadata. So instead of going to my account object, I'm going to look in custom metadata. I'm going to find my custom metadata object of ID mapping. I'm looking for the account business record type, and I need the 15-digit ID, which I learned the hard way. It's not the 18-digit ID in validation rules. I'm going to put that in here. So I'm going to go ahead, check my syntax, because that's what you always do. Record type ID. Somehow I put it in here without an and. So let's fix that. See, this is why we check syntax, especially when we run live. All right, no errors found. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save that. So that is an active validation rule. I'm going to hop back over to my Acme account. And I'm just going to quickly make sure that I actually have this set to be a record type of business. which we do. Phenomenal. Hi, Ruth. I love the fact that she waves and her tail wags. It's great. So now if I come in here and I try and update this record and make this blank, I should get an error message. So let's see what happens on real demos. Hey, look at that. I did not have to hard code that ID, but I've got it in here. So I'll put that back. So now if we go look for a different account, that is the Dickinson family, that is absolutely, clearly, and definitely in no way a business. I should not expect to have a website, but they're a pretty cool family. So I'm going to give them a rating of hot. No problems with my validation rule. All right, Terry, my man, back over to you.
All right. Hello, my name is Flow, naming conventions that make any flow feel like an old friend. And I know most of you are probably thinking, there he goes again. He's on his soapbox about naming conventions. And I love naming conventions and flows. You probably are never going to convince me different. If you're curious in the naming convention that I use, you can click down that QR code, that'll take you there. The reason I like naming conventions, and I don't really care what naming convention you use, just have one and be consistent with it, but it aids in searchability. It makes it easier to find what you're looking for. I just made up this acronym, by the way, that I thought that was pretty cool. I was clever without even realizing I was being clever. It's usability, it's less prone to make mistakes, and I'll show you why in a second. It's also easier to maintain, easier for the next guy. It's easier for you the next time you have to go in and work with this flow. So let me give you an example. This is one that I built for one of my clients, and they gave me the permission to share this with you. But notice as it scrolls down the side, how consistent that is in every section. There were a few pieces that looked like I missed as I went through it, but extremely consistent as it scrolls down through all of those different resources that are in this org. Now, this isn't a huge flow, but it's a reasonably large flow. And if you're trying to find things in that flow, it can be a little bit difficult. So having that naming convention makes a huge, huge difference. So for example, if I wanted to come up here and find where are all of my S object collections, S object just stands for, it's a Salesforce object, like an account or a custom object. So SO is Salesforce object, and then COL just simply means it's a collection, meaning it's more than one record. So I can simply type that in, and every place I am leveraging the S object, it will show up in my search results. So that makes it really easy. If I'm trying to find something or debug an issue, it makes it simpler to find the things that you're looking for when you've got that level of consistency. Now, here's where I think it's really beneficial too, is when you're doing something like a new assignment and you know that you need to find a collection, maybe it's an S object. In this case, I'm looking for something that is an Apex object. I simply type in that keyword and everything then that it fits that shows up for me. That's a whole lot easier to find the information you're looking for and make sure that you're getting the right thing than it is if your naming convention is all over the place. It's also easier to follow. So there again, you can see Apex and all of those that are there. So that is naming conventions. Please use them. You'll thank me later. I'm sure you will. Michelle.
So one other thing to actually add on the naming conventions. So Terry and I were chatting and I showed him what I had worked on for something. And I actually have a naming convention for my flows as well, not just what's in them, that he seemed to think was pretty nifty.
Oh, it was very nifty.
So what I do here is I start with the object it's on. Then I have what launches it. Then this is actually backwards. So normally it's what context it runs in and then when it runs. So account RT, record triggered, update only, UO, AS, after save. And then what the flow actually does is update contact addresses. So I have another one down here on opportunity, also record triggered. This one is actually before save. And then this one does a create. And so basically what this does is it allows me to sort or create list views of my flows to say, I only want to see everything that's got a count, or I want to see everything that impacts opportunity. Then because I have this, I can sort them by how they're triggered, then by how they run, and then go from there. And it helps me keep my flows better organized.
And we are at the bottom of the hour. So if you have to leave, I totally understand, but I do want you to see one more of these best practices, and I'm skipping number 7, Michelle, if that's all right.
Oh
But
yeah.
this one is worth being here for. If you aren't aware of this one, and I'm not going to do a demo on it just because of time, but normally that record ID variable, when we set that up inside of a flow, we've been taught to set that up as a text variable. If you set that thing up as a record type variable, so a record variable, it will pass in the entire record into this record ID. So you don't have to go out and query, or because a lot of times what we'll do in our flows is we'll get the record ID into our flow and then we'll go query to get the rest of that record. You do not have to do that DML action. You can simply define your record ID as a record variable, and you'll get the entire thing into your flow. The entire record will come in to your flow. Michelle, anything else that you dying to share?
I think flip to the next slide, or maybe a couple slides.
All right, let's see.
This is the one. Yep.
This guy?
Yep.
Lots of best practices. And we will put this out on our community so that you can have access to it. But good information right there. And thank you guys all for being here. We appreciate you coming. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us in the community. Michelle, or tweet us. And Michelle's like a god of tweeting, so you'll get a response right away from her. So feel free to reach out however you choose to. But thanks again for coming. If you have any questions, again, just let us know. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. See you later.